with the growing abundance of seasonal anime taking up most, if not all, of my anime watching time, it's not really surprising if there's one or two shows, or maybe half the season, that I just don't end up getting to, and I think that's a sentiment a lot of us can share. And that's what makes up the bulk of what I consider the gems of the season. Those shows that missed the mark on my initial radar and are really underrated, or seemingly underrated. And one of those shows, airing 2 years ago, recommended from my friend, was To Be Hero, this really weird show animated by Howliner's Animation League, a Chinese animation company with a subsidiary, Emon, in Japan. I wasn't, and still am not, really familiar with any of their shows, but To Be Hero and the show I want to discuss today, To Be Heroine, definitely for me put them on my radar, and I hope to be able to extend some of that to anyone who's seen this show airing on Crunchyroll and the likes, wondering just what kind of rabbit hole is waiting for them. The first thing I want to tackle is the topic of whether you need to watch To Be Hero or not to understand what's going on in this supposed sequel. The short answer is no. Technically this is a sequel, it's To Be Hero Season 2, but the story of the first season isn't one that's being brought over, at least not in full. There's a lot going on in To Be Hero, and I'd love to take the time to discuss that show in full another time, but really, you don't need to watch the previous season to understand what's going on. That might be a blessing or a curse, since the first season is quite interesting and unique, and definitely worth giving a try all on its own. Of course, it wouldn't be a season 2 if there wasn't at least some kind of connection. But from what we have, they played off well enough in their own contained story, so that it really isn't that much of a problem. It's just one character that we see throughout both seasons, but that's about it. The focus really at this moment isn't about that shared character, and we have our own new characters to worry about, and it seems that there really isn't confusion about seeing this character being introduced. It feels organic and integrated so that the season stands out all on its own. And that's really good, since it means that you can come into the series from this point, from To Be Heroine, which so far is an amazing show all on its own right. To say that To Be Heroine is an isekai story would be correct. I think it does fit into the bill of a main character being transported into another world. And hey, I love my isekais as much as the next guy, but it does something that I think makes this show stand out from the usual isekai methodology that at least I see often. That is to say that To Be Heroine focuses a lot of its time on the main character, Futaba, rather than being a supernatural otherworld action story, though that element is still there. The story, in the broadest strokes, revolves around Futaba being sent one day, seemingly from her wishes, to an alternate world, where clothes become powerful allies named Speecloths, or spiritual cloths I assume, that are summoned to fight. Unfortunately for her, she gets tangled up in a war between light and dark, as she meets Hikaru, while he's on the run from assassins hell-bent on taking him out and ensuring that the world is under their domain. But beyond that is the story of Futaba back in the real world, which is, in our case, her past, along with Hikaru and Toru and Min, her main group of friends just trying to live and survive through their own problems and growing complexities as high school students. And these two stories actually come together in tandem. One is not without the other. I actually really liked this kind of twist on what you'd expect from a plot like this. It takes the usual main character who's entrenched in what seems to be a distaste of society and is tired of having to live the way she is through the illusion of choice. And instead of offering her a fantastical escape, pits her directly with that darkness within. There is no escaping for Futaba, as this other world begins to parallel all of the aspects of her actual life, from the people to the opponents to her memories of the life that just keep coming back to her when she sees anything in this world. For me, it serves as a really interesting way to build Futaba and her character while also fleshing out the supporting cast, despite them being, well, weird alternate versions of themselves. It also breaks up the storytelling in a way that doesn't feel too intrusive as you might think flashbacks are, since everything in both worlds can be and are very interwoven and connected. But despite how well I think that parallelism works in this anime, and how interesting it is to use that idea of juxtaposition in an isekai setting of all things, at times it might just be better not to throw in all of the spectacle. For me, that's probably the main counterpoint in having an action story show character and show all of its backstory, and to connect it to the main story, is it's kind of lost the focus. The main plot can be about saving the world and overthrowing dark with the last remaining beacon of light. Or the main plot can be about Futaba and her group of friends in reality, trying to live and be happy in their ever-growing, constricting world of prejudice and expectations and anxiety. That story, from what they've shown in their flashback sequences, could very well just be its own drama anime. And you know what? I wouldn't be disappointed to see that aspect of the show be its own thing if it ever was in an alternate world, especially with all the parts that they've shown us. A serious drama with childhood trauma and likable characters with a side of magic realism, or supernaturalness, or even just mystery for the characters to overcome, could have very well been a really nice show all of its own, without the action. But from the surface now, it's more like the other way around, with that supernatural, strange element put to the forefront, with the whole being transported to the other world, and the small peaks of the subtextual world, and character building and depth taking part to contrast the very nonsensical and the goofiness of the isekai. And the parts I want more of one than the other, which is to say that although I think the balance is careful enough, there are still some aspects of the show that at this point is more desirable than others, at least for me. They are striking a nice balance at times, but at other times I'm just way more hooked on one of the show's aspects more than the others, and once they switch, it really throws me off. But again, there is a really nice balance to be struck, and I think both aspects of the show are really interesting all in its own right, and the juxtaposition of the two, for the most part, is pretty well done, despite some issues of importance and focus. I think that parallelism alone is already such an interesting way to tell a story that it's worth it to see how they manage it in this show. But another appealing part of the show, and one that probably is the reason for this whole topic of duality, is the action. Having a grounded drama is cool and all, but having a drama set in reality doesn't let you have the insane action scenes that this show has. And although yes, these scenes look and feel pretty damn cool, I also applaud the show for having action that also relates to the story. These action scenes don't just exist to show off the talents of all the animators involved, but also serve a purpose and are used sparingly as such. And I can appreciate that. I want my action scenes to fill me with adrenaline pumping action, but also have some kind of reason for being there. As awesome as it is to see action fill me with excitement, I also want to know why we're fighting. I don't want spectacle for the sake of spectacle, but I want stakes to be had, and development to be made, and storytelling through these moments. For me, it makes the action just that much more meaningful and memorable and worth watching. And I can say that To Be Heroine is delivering on that front, striking the balance of action scenes that mean something while also just satisfying me. But it isn't just the action scenes that deserve to be praised. I think the show in general is just really well drawn and made. It looks nice, and there's a very stylistic approach to many of the scenes, not just in the action but also from the direction. There are a lot of interesting directorial choices, which can be seen right from the beginning of the show, and just that alone really drew me in, to be honest, and it was a treat to see that sustained throughout the show. It's just really nice to see interesting shots and to have the storytelling not only be broken up in the method it's told through its parallelism, but also by the visual space on the screen. So I hope they keep this up, and if anything, the early episodes that we have now are definitely pulling their stops. But along those lines of what's on the screen is also what's heard from the screen, and it's also a very interesting way to break things up in another very visceral and unique manner. If by now you haven't caught my drift, this show is for me just really different and doing a lot of things that I think the first season of To Be Hero did, which is just to have fun. I think it really bleeds out when they have two sets of languages in the show. If the sudden flashbacks weren't obvious enough, now we have them speaking a completely different language and then switching back to Japanese, and it gets pretty messy at times. But it's also very cool that they even add that as a part of the show. They could have very well just not did that and the show would have still made sense, but having that aspect of switching between Mandarin and Japanese for me just adds so much more style and character to the show and really does a lot for the story as well, strangely enough. Since the story really is all about this parallelism and really vying for this idea that the true worlds are a manifestation of Futawa's inner self, at least I think so, and that she's probably going to eventually have to fight and beat the demons of this parallel world to develop her actual real life self, it makes sense that the true worlds have different languages. It's an audible cue to separate the two timelines, but it also formally separates them, making them out to be different entities just from what we hear. And it's very visceral in doing so. So that's a really damn well nice touch. I think the bottom line for the show is just how much passion is bleeding out of the screen, how much fun the show can be in between the moments of its very serious drama and the characters, and honestly quite nice writing at times. It's at times an interesting balance of an action isekai plot with the character drama alongside well-made directing and stylistic choices that make this anime for me something very special and unique, and just stands out from many of the shows coming out. If anything, it's just that, a unique show, and definitely worth dipping your toes in, whether you loved or hated the first season, or don't know anything about it, or are interested to see what other countries are up to in the form of anime.